there really are only two economic systems. There's socialist and there's capitalist. And these exist, if you're looking at the screen here, I've got each one of these on one side, socialist on the left and capitalist on the right. And then at the top I've got a line with arrows on each side that's showing that it's a continuum. That there really are no purely capitalist nations, and there are very close to purely socialist, but there aren't many purely socialist nations. Nations exist on this line somewhere, on a continuum. And what economies try to do is answer some questions. The economic system that we have is answering some questions. And they're questions like, what are we going to make? We've got limited farmland, limited factories, limited workers. What are we going to make with those limited resources? How much are we going to make? And how are we going to determine that? What price are we going to sell the stuff that we make at? Who owns the resources? Who owns the factories? Who owns the land? Who controls the labor? Who makes the profit? Who gets to keep it? These two systems, socialist on the left and capitalist on the right, they answer these questions differently. A socialist answers these questions like this. What are we going to make? What price are we going to sell things at? Who owns it? Is all determined by a central authority. A central authority. Someone in the government. Some kind of a government planner or government department. And there's a philosophy that underpins socialism. The word social means people. The underlying philosophy is that all the resources in the economy, all the money, all the land, all the labor, all the production, all the factories, ought to benefit everyone equally. That's the philosophy behind socialism. And so another part of this underlying philosophy in socialism is that there are some people in the nation who know better than others. Some people just know what you need more than you do. They know what things should be priced at more than the business owner does. They know what you should pay for products more than you know. But on the other side of this, who makes the decisions about these questions? In a capitalist system believes that individuals should make these decisions. The man who owns the plant should decide how much to make and what to make. And the buyer on the street should decide how much they're going to pay. And the individual should own the resources and therefore get the profit that comes from those resources. So the underlying philosophy in capitalism is that the benefit of the resources should be based on the productivity, the work ethic, and the risk of the individual. So if I am willing to risk my entire fortune starting a business and work 90 hours a week for 10 years to get it going, then I should reap the benefit of that, and you should not. You should reap the benefit of what you are willing to produce and you are willing to do. So the underlying philosophy, to take it a step further, is that each individual knows what is best for himself. So we want to look at three factors now and ask ourselves, what is the best system? And we're going to look at three different factors. Information, I'll explain what that is, incentive, and freedom. So let's now look at capitalism and socialism from the standpoint of information. What do I mean by information here? Well, what I mean is, if you think about the questions that economic system is trying to answer, what do we make, how much do we make, how much do we charge for it, those kinds of questions. In order to make that decision for an entire country, you have to have a lot of information. Let's say that you are thinking about the shoes that you want produced next year. All right? In a socialist system, there'd be someone in the government who's trying to figure out what kinds of shoes, what kinds of patterns, what kinds of styles, price levels, all of that stuff. In a capitalist society, the individuals will be doing that. The individual business owners, the manufacturers of shoes, the individual consumers will be making choices about which ones they bought. So the question is, who has the best information so that we can most efficiently get these resources out to people? Well, let's say there's a guy in the government. Let's look at the socialist system. We're going to call him Mr. Giddy Government. Giddy Government, G-U-B-M-E-N-T. Yes, that is a little pun on government. Mr. Giddy Government. And he is the greatest guy you could ever meet. He is the nicest guy. He loves his fellow citizens, and he loves shoes. And so he is going to try and make the decisions for what is going to be produced in the economy next year for shoes. So how well would he be able to do that? Think about that for a moment. Let's say that he decided that he saw a lot of green and red shoes being worn this year. So he said, we're going to key up the factories and we're going to make green and red shoes next year. And he went and he visited every factory in the country, and he spent every waking hour trying to figure out exactly what everybody was going to want for shoes. And then the next year came along and people didn't want green and red shoes or blue and red shoes or whatever. They wanted something different. You see, the fact of the matter is, giddy government, no matter how much he tried, no matter how many hours he spent, he would not be able to figure out the preferences of 300 million people for shoes like the tens of thousands of businesses and the tens of millions of individuals making individual decisions, doing individual research, making adjustments on the fly day in, day out would be able to do. And this is one of the great weaknesses of socialism. Kevin Williamson, in his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Socialism, talked about this problem in the Soviet Union. But he wrote this. He said, the odd thing is that shortages appeared in product lines of which the Soviet Union was the largest producer in the world. In the late 1980s, the USSR produced more than 3 pairs of shoes for each citizen. That's a lot of shoes. But people had to wait to buy shoes. The problem was that the available shoes did not reflect consumers' tastes. The shoes were made to fulfill a government plan, not to satisfy market demand. So when you're looking at which is best from an information standpoint, capitalism or a free market economy is best. Now let's look at incentive. This is a critical point. Incentive. What do I mean by incentives? If you think about a socialist versus a capitalist system, and if you think about in a socialist system where the goal is that everybody has the same of everything, and so no matter what you do, as you move more towards socialism, you lose the incentive, you lose the reward for your individual effort and productivity, because the government is beginning to take more and more of what you produce to give it to other people. But if let's say that I wanted to start a business, and I love, let's say I loved music, and I wanted to produce my own music, and I wanted to help other artists get their start in music, and as I went along, I would make a little bit of profit on all that I had done, and so I would receive, the benefit of that. So that would be a great motivation for me. But if the government came along and said, Wes, I don't care how much you like music, I don't know how good you are at music, I don't care how many people you help. When you're done, we're going to take your profit away from you, and you're only going to have as much as you had before you started that business. What is the likelihood that I would start that business? Now think about the United States. Think about all the amazing things that have been invented here. So the question is, why were these not invented in Russia? Why were these not invented in Cuba? Why were these not invented in Venezuela? Because in those places there is no incentive to invest your creativity, take risk, and produce these kinds of items. In the United States, the creators of these inventions had the incentive to create them because they were free to create and they were free to reap the benefits of those creations. If you take away incentive, this is absolutely critical. You take away the individual effort of human beings, and that can only lead to poverty. How do we do that today? We take away incentive by taxing the rich, high taxes on the rich. We control prices. When you say to a business, hey Wes, you go ahead and you start selling your records and your albums and your songs, but you can only sell them for 25 cents a piece. You can't sell them for any more than that. I don't care how much it costs you. Well, where's the incentive to create the song then? And overregulation of industries. We overregulate them. We just bog them down with so many rules that it becomes fruitless and pointless to keep trying to create things and create value and create wealth because it's just too much trouble. How are we doing on the scorecard so far? We've got information that goes to the capitalist, the free market. We've got incentive that goes to the free market. So let's look at freedom now. This will be the last one that we look at. As we move on that spectrum from capitalist and free markets to government control, to where the government has to make the decisions, we necessarily have to give more of our freedom over to the government because the economy touches every part of life. We have to give up our freedom for negotiating our own labor rates because the government's going to tell us how much we're going to get paid. We have to give up our freedom to make decisions about what we want to buy. The government's going to say, you don't get to choose. You get this or you get that. Those are the only options that you have. As you move towards government control, the government has to control things like the trucks and the factories and the labor schedule and the hours and management techniques, and they get to control everything. Government control of the economy requires government control of the people. Ronald Reagan saw this. He said a government can't control the economy without controlling people. And America's founding fathers knew when a government sets out to do that, it must use force and coercion to achieve its purpose. So as we come along and we cry out for the government to, don't let those rich drug companies make so much money, or why can't I get paid more? Government, make sure I get a higher wage. Or government, give me more free stuff. Give me what's fair. Give me what's mine. What we're asking the government to do is to take more control over our lives. And that's why we find in socialist nations, the government becomes more authoritarian and more controlling. A free market or a capitalist nation tends to be more democratic. And it's very hard to find a capitalist free market government in history that persecuted and oppressed its people. But almost every government that persecuted and oppressed its people in the past, especially since the Industrial Revolution, have been socialist nations. So when we look at our chart here, our scorecard, we go down the line and we see that again, from a standpoint of freedom, the capitalist free market system is the best.